We have a very unusual dirham struck by Ibn al-Ash'ath. And the question is, what do the differences between this dirham and reform dirham mean? This is a dirham struck in protest of the policies of al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. Today, I want to talk about a very interesting coin that turned up in the market a few years back, a dirham from the mint of Sears for the year 80. It is very unusual. The reformed coins of al-Malik bin Marwan are notable for the regularity of the legends and the coin design. This coin was struck following a very different model and raises questions about the interpretation of al-Malik's reformed coins. The legends are actually quite clear, although the coin's a little bit scruffy. We have in the obverse field the legend, "There is no God but God." And in the margin, we have the Quranic verse, Muhammad is the messenger. Well, Muhammad is the messenger of God, followed by an excerpt from the Quran. He sent him with right guidance in the religion of truth. And the reverse has a most unusual legend. It has, "And he is most gracious, most merciful," instead of an excerpt from the surat al-Ikhlas. And the margin has, "This dirham was struck in Sears in the year 80. And that is within a year or two of the general introduction of reformed dirhams across the Near East. Sears is a relatively small town in the northern part of Sijistan in western Iran, located not very far from Basra. And it's a bit curious that we have this coin from this mint with the general introduction of dirhams. We do have some slightly anomalous issues coming from mints in Iran Shah in the year 78, but this is altogether different from those. We know from the chronology that this coin was probably struck by Ibn al-Ash'ath. And the reason I say that is Ibn al-Ash'ath was appointed to lead a campaign into Sijistan in the year 80. And the Tabari tells us that he set up camp in Al-Sus to get ready for his campaign. So Al-Sus was the place where he fielded his army. And so his name is not on the coin, but it more than likely is connected to his presence in Al-Sus in that year, mobilizing an army for a campaign in the East. His army was a very, very large army, and it was nicknamed the Peacock Army by the Governor General of the East, al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf, because so much money was spent on it, and so much money was spent on supplies and provisions for that army. Al-Hajjaj and Ibn al-Ash'ath did not get along. They had a tense relationship. And later, during that campaign, he rebels against al-Hajjaj and marches west all the way to Iraq, where he temporarily pushes al-Hajjaj out, and there's a major internal conflict. Now, in considering the significance of this coin, we need to begin by talking with reference to the reformed dirham, that it stood in its place. The reformed dirham has the legend in the obverse field, "There is no God but God alone, he has no partner." And so right there, you notice that there's a difference in that where the dirham of Ibn al-Ash'ath states once that God is there is no God but God, the reformed dirham actually restates this. It states it 3 times. In the obverse margin, we have, "In the name of God, this dirham was struck in Basra in the year 79. So we have an administrative legend on the obverse. It's in the margin, but it's on the obverse. And on the Ibn al-Shah's dirham, it was placed on the reverse. In the reverse field, we have the excerpt from the surat al-Ikhlas. Ibn al-Shah has, instead of the surat al-Ikhlas, he has the legend, and he is most merciful and most compassionate. And the marginal legend that appears on the reformed dirhams is what appears in the margin of the obverse on Ibn al-Shah's coin. Muhammad is the messenger of God. He sent him to establish right guidance in the religion of truth, even if the corruptors are reverse. So the legend on Ibn al-Shah's coin appears on the obverse rather than reverse. It's also a little bit shorter than what appears on the reformed dirham. And we can speculate about the significance of that. You know, the legends are a little bit cruder on Ibn al-Shah's coin. Perhaps he couldn't fit the entire verse, or perhaps he intended to leave off that portion of the verse for other reasons. The declaration of God's unity is something that everybody takes for granted when they read, early Muslim coins. It's actually worth noting more than it is worth receiving more attention than it normally does. The declaration of God's unity is not necessarily a quintessential Islamic slogan. In the Quran, the phrase, "there is no God but God," occurs only twice. The phrase, "there is no God but some other attribute," occurs 37 times. And when you say "there is no God but," and then you say, ar-Rahman or al-Samad or some other word, you are actually qualifying who or what God represents. But when you get it, the simple phrase of "without qualification, there is no God but God," is very rare. It doesn't occur very often in the Quran. The Tawheed, which is what this phrase is known as, is unknown in Arabic epigraphy until the end of the 7th century. And under the Zubayrids, it is limited to Musa bin al-Zubair and Abdulaziz bin Abdullah, his governor in Sijistan. And the appearance of that phrase in Sijistan, it appears on the Dirham of 72, or 691, 692 of the Common Era, and that is translated into Pahlavi. The declaration of God's unity, the Tawheed, subsequently, after the Zubayrids, becomes relatively widespread under the Marwanids. We have it in Damascus. We have it up in Georgia, what is today Georgia. We have it in Iraq. We have it in Fars. And we have it in Khorasan, within the span of 5 or 8 years. What's interesting is that all of these coins, or all these instances where the Tawheed appears, occur on coins that were struck by members of the Umayyad family, with the one exception being al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. We have al-Malik bin Marwan, who inscribed it in Damascus. The coin from Georgia, the Caucasus, does not have a name legend, but Muhammad bin Marwan was the governor at that time, and we do have coins with his name on it. Bishr bin Marwan was the governor general of the East in Iraq when he struck his coins with the Tawheed. And of course, al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. And Umayyad bin Abdullah was the governor who struck it in Khorasan in the middle of the 690s. And he is a member of the Umayyad family, not the Marwanids, but a different branch of the family. So you get the sense that during that decade, that this legend signified was something that meant something particular to the members of the family, of the Umayyad family, and that other governors were reluctant to use it, and perhaps would have felt that they could not use it, that it did not belong to them. And it's quite interesting that al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf, who had it on his coins from 695 to 698, removes that legend when the reformed coins are introduced generally in Iran Shah. Of course, the question then is, or what does God represent? Why would the statement of God's unity appear to be so controversial? Why would people be reluctant to use it? And I think part of the answer is that for the Marwanids, at least, that the God was identified with the sun, and we find the image of the sun in different forms on many coinage of this period. To the left, we have a Byzantine coin from Hims with the sun on the obverse and the reverse, and then two circled dots, which are alternative symbols for the sun. On to the right, we have a coin from Aleppo that was struck sometime later. But what's interesting here is we have the phrase, "There is no God but God alone." And right before the word God, we have the image of the sun. So clearly, the author of this coin was trying to conflate the image of the sun with the word for God. We look at a little in the 690s when we have al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf adopts his radial design for his dirhams, and we note that the image that is created very much resembles the image of the sun. If we take the legend of the declaration of faith, each line of that legend to be a ray of light, we find they all radiate from the person of al-Hajjaj. So part of the reason is perhaps that the phrase was controversial and rulers were reluctant to use it, was that many people were identifying the ruler, God, with the sun, and themselves as God, and that then creates a conflict in that one, not everybody can claim to be God, but for some people it would also be objectionable. It would elevate the power of the ruler to an extent that would raise objections from people for all sorts of practical and perhaps theological reasons. Now we have the surat al-Ikhlas, which appears on reformed coins, and I think it's worth reading it just to read the whole thing, because oftentimes we have excerpts and we don't have the whole surah. So the surah is, "Say, He is God, the one and only, God the eternal, the absolute. He begetteth not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him." Now, people very frequently identify this as a statement of faith that distinguishes Islam from Christianity. And I think that that's incorrect. I think that it promotes a view of God that is impersonal. It promotes a view of God being impersonal. And within Christianity, there are currents or schools of thought at that time in late antiquity that held God to be in very similar terms. Not all Christians in late antiquity believed that Jesus Christ was born the Son of God. A number of Christians, many historians, as certain groups of Monophysites, believed that Christ became God after he was born, that the Spirit of God came down to him and then he became God. But his essence was human. In more or less, it seems that the Marwanids are making the same argument, that if they are going to identify themselves as God, they are not saying that they were born gods. They're saying that God's Spirit, God's will, has made them gods, and therefore, they claim the status as divine rulers. Now, what's interesting is the Surat al-Ikhlas, we know it from reformed coins, and that's the imperial coinage. So that's going to have whatever al-Malik bin Marwan or his successors want. But it also appears on copper coins in Syria and Palestine. So it's well known in the Jazeera. number of mints of the Jazeera. It's also known in Tiberias. It is, and it's known on some anonymous Syrian issues that may come from anywhere, Syria or the Jazeera. It is not known on coinage in Iran Shah. And there's no issues that have it. Where there are, there's two exceptions. One is Mosul at the end of the Umayyad period. That is with a Hajjaj revolt that was closely linked to members of the Umayyad family. And then there's an issue in Khorasan, the early part of the 8th century. It's a ruler that was appointed there by the Umayyad caliph directly. All right, now, as far as we know, or literary sources tell us that religious authorities in Iraq and Medina objected to the use of the surat al-Ikhlas on al-Malik's dirhams. And these authorities were from Basra and Kufa, and then also Medina. They very specifically identify the surat al-Ikhlas, surat al-Ikhlas. They do not say Quranic verse, and oftentimes in secondary sources, people say that, oh, you're not supposed to inscribe Quranic verse on the coins. That may or may not be true depending on who you talk to, but at least for our sources in the early period, they do not use the term Quranic verse. They say, they give a quote from the Surat al-Ikhlas. So the Surat al-Ikhlas, as well as the Tawheed, were controversial during that decade, the 690s. And it's very interesting. We have a couple different issues, I believe, but this one is a really good one. We have a copper with the Surat al-Fatah rather than the Surat al-Ikhlas struck in J in the year 97. What's interesting about this coin is it has all the legends of the dinar, with the exception of the reverse field. And instead of an excerpt from the Surat al-Ikhlas, it has an excerpt from the Surat al-Fatah. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. So there are no objections to inscribing Quranic verse on the coin, but a definite objection to using an excerpt from the Surat al-Ikhlas. So you sense a geographical differences in the choice of verses and attitudes towards some of the verses in the Quran. So I suggested that the main issue of the objection with the Tawheed in the Surat al-Ikhlas is the use of those statements and verses to grant powers to the ruler that other people objected to. And what we find here on coins in Iran is perhaps a critique of those sorts of claims. And so on the left, we have a coin by al-Hajjaj bin al-Hajjaj, which definitely struck in the year 685, 686 from Nardashir Khora. And it has in the margin, the Arabic in the margin, it has, there is no judgment except by God. And it translates that into Pahlavi in the name legend. And I find that very interesting because it promotes an impersonal view of God. And it goes so far as to place that statement in a place where you would normally have a name legend, which identifies the person of the ruler. So in this case, it does not identify the person of the ruler. The second thing, coin we have is a Sasanian coin with a Hajjaj countermark, or a countermark by the Hajjaj bin al-Hajjaj. It has the same kind of legend. And this one says, there is no judgment except God alone. He has no partner. And this sort of reiterates the same thing that we had in the other legend. But the other curious thing about this is this mimics the structure. You say it mimics a syntax of the Reformed Tawheed. So the Reformed Tawheed say there is no God, but God alone, he has no partner. This one says there is no judgment except by God, or except God alone, he has no partner. So the difference there is God and judgment. And so knowing that the Zaraka were very much against the identification of the ruler with God, it stands to reason that they were objecting to the Umayyad formulation, and that the Umayyads identified God with the ruler. Now we come to the declaration of Muhammad's messengership, which is an important part of the Reformed legends, and which also appears on Ibn al-Shah's coin. Now, the first thing that I would say is the declaration of Muhammad's messengership is first adopted at the end of the 7th century, approximately when the Tawheed is. But when it first appears, it appears separately from the Tawheed. So while we oftentimes could connect the Tawheed and the Risala together in the Kalimat and a single declaration of Muslim faith, in their conception, they were separate statements, and they may have, they had separate purposes. They identified different models of authority. So as a statement by itself, it's first adopted by al-Malik bin Abdullah without the Tawheed in Bishapur in the year 66. And that's the same year that the Qatari bin al-Hajjaj struck his coin in Adashir with the hukam, the declaration that there is no judgment except by God. So there is a chronological correlation there that suggests that one may have been in response to the other. The other thing is that Abdul-Malik bin Abdullah was also fighting al-Mukhtar to the north in Kufa. And there was actually an attempt in that year to overthrow his authority by al-Mukhtar. And so the adopting this legend, Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad is messenger of God, provides an alternative claim to authority, alternative to the Zarakas and al-Mukhtars. And al-Mukhtar was promoting was a pro-Allied rebel, and he was promoting loyalty to a son of Ali bin Abi Talib, Muhammad bin al-Hanafiya. The Risala was then adopted by Musa bin al-Zubair and his governor Abdulaziz bin Abdullah, and combined with the Tawheed just a couple years later in 689, 690, and 692. Under the Umayyads, we also have the Risala appearing by itself without the Tawheed. And so we have it with Khalid bin Abdullah, and we have it with Bishr bin Marwan. And again, both of these rulers are members of the Umayyad family. So you have a sense that the Tawheed and the Risala were important political statements. Not just any governor could use them. And that suggests that they really did promote a very specific model of authority that people have to be careful about. The messengership of Muhammad appears on the coins of Musab bin Zubair. We have the coin on the left is his in the year 69, 688 to 89 Common Era. What's interesting here is he has the Tawheed in the margin, but he puts the Risala in the name legend, just as Qatari bin al-Fujat put his declaration of faith in the name legend. Musa bin al-Zubair puts the Risala in the name legend, suggesting that they're contesting, what is being contested is the question of whether on what basis a ruler could have divine authority. And the messenger, of course, that statement is a model of authority. The messenger received his authority from God. He's a human being. He received his authority from God. And his role as Rasul or messenger means that he carried divine law. To the right, we have a coin that belongs to Atiyah bin al-Aswad. And Atiyah bin al-Aswad is a leader of a Hajjaj band in Kirman from 70 to about 77 in the Common Era, about 689 to 696. And here again, we have the phrase, Muhammad is the messenger of God, engraved where we would expect a name legend. So he didn't put his name legend, he put that name legend. Atiyah bin al-Aswad broke away from Qatari bin al-Fujat over certain doctrines. Qatari bin al-Fujat executed a Muslim under controversial circumstances. He actually killed women and children. And Atiyah bin al-Aswad objected to this. And as a result of that conflict, broke away from him. He went off to Kirman, and Qatari bin al-Fujat remained in Fars. Atiyah bin al-Aswad represented a more moderate branch of Khawarij thought. And significantly, he places he adopts Muhammad as the messenger of God. Qatari bin al-Fujat does not. One other thing that is interesting is the marginal legend. We know it's Atiyah bin al-Aswad's coin because of the marginal legend, Bismillah wali al-Amr, in the name of God, the guardian of authority. That legend is actually recut from a Zubairid legend that we know from Kirman at that time. You know, the question of, Muhammad being the messenger of God was a something that the Zubairids had adopted, and by Atiyah bin al-Aswad adopting this, he may have appealed to followers of Ibn al-Zubair. Now we come back to the epithet on Ibn al-Shah's coin, Wahuwa ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and he is most merciful and most compassionate. These are very unusual legends to find on early Muslim coins. And that's a little bit surprising because the phrase most merciful occurs 48 times in the Quran, most compassionate occurs 34 times. So these are frequent epithets of God, but they rarely appear on the early Muslim coins. In the one verse I have up here, there is no God but He, most gracious, most merciful, shows the way that the statement of God's unity is often qualified in the Quran. It is not simply a standalone statement of God is one. It is oftentimes a statement of God is one, emphasizing particular qualities. And in this case, most gracious, most merciful. There's an inscription of Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan at a dam in Ta'if. Unfortunately, I don't have it here, but it also refers to God as most gracious and most merciful. And it stands out, in contrast to all those other statements where you have, there is no God but God, God is one alone, there he has no partner. Now I have two coins where this appears. The one on the left is a copper coin, a Umayyad copper coin. On the obverse, it has, there is no God but God alone. In the reverse has in the name of God, most merciful, most, and the same with the dinar on the right, which is from North Africa. There's no God but God alone, and in the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate. So it has the statement of faith, a statement of God's unity, but it qualifies it as most merciful and most compassionate. And so the reason is, why is it being qualified on in these coins, but not being qualified in other coins? And what implications would that have for political religious authority? So now we come back to Ibn al-Shath and his campaign to the east. The frontier in the east, near Bust and Kandahar, was a very volatile frontier. And previously, an army had been destroyed. The army of Ubaydullah bin Abi Bakr had been destroyed on that eastern frontier by the Zunbil, the opponents of the Muslims on the frontier. Ibn al-Shath was being equipped with a large army to go out to that frontier for the purpose of destroying this enemy. But you have, with this coin, you have some sense that Ibn al-Shath was appealing for the ruler to be merciful in his demands on this army. And the word God may refer to the caliph al-Malik bin Marwan, because at this point in time, al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf no longer inscribed the Tawheed on his dirhams. Or it may be an appeal to al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. That's a debate. What is interesting, so we have dirhams from all over Iran Shah in this year, and on his route, we find that when he gets to Bam, there is a reformed dirham that exists from that date for the year 80, which was probably struck the same year. It follows, and it was one of the way stations for his march to the east. So it was whatever he struck in Asus, it was not followed up in other places where Ibn al-Shath went. When he went to reach Sijistan, he did not strike reformed dirhams. He continued to strike drams. The drams, his first drams had the legend "In the name of God, my Lord," in the year 80. In the year 80, 81, he changed that to simply "In the name of God." And the difference in that legend is interesting. "In the name of God" is the plainest legend you could put together. It does not imply any kind of hierarchy of authority. If you have the legend "In the name of God, my Lord," it suggests that God is at least known to people through the person of the ruler, who is simply saying "my Lord." There is a dram where that original issue of Ibn al-Shath has the phrase "my Lord" crossed out, either on the die or in the coin itself, suggesting that to somebody at one point in time that was an objectionable phrase. Now, to recap, I think that this coin of Ibn al-Shath highlights are differences in the outlook and the political and religious doctrines of Syro-Palestine and Iran Shah. In Syro-Palestine, you have a predestinarian model of authority, political and religious authority. The emphasis is on God's unity, and it's declaring it 3 times. And you can imagine when you repeat yourself 3 times, you probably are having an argument with somebody. So I imagine that when al-Malik inscribed the Tawheed 3 times, it was a forceful declaration that anticipated opposition and therefore had to emphasize the fact that there's unity. And the surat al-Ikhlas, similarly, it declares God's unity 4 times without mentioning or qualifying the unity of God, without providing anything that implies restraint, any kind of restraint in the exercise of that authority. Okay? There's no indication of restraint in authority. The same thing, the Reformed coins depersonalize God. Okay, the sort of the clause emphasizes that God is not born and then does not bear offspring. The administrative information appears on the obverse margin without a name legend and without an iconographical image. And so this is, the most impersonal information is the institution of the mint and the date. You eliminate any figure of the ruler, you are also eliminating any perception of that ruler as being human. Now, the coin does allow the delegation of authority to human actors, and that is what the declaration of Muhammad's messengership is all about. And that is what the mission verse is all about. It represents God delegating authority to a human actor. But on the Reformed dirham, this is pushed to the reverse margin. So it's in the least conspicuous place possible. When you compare this and we look at the Ibn al-Shah's dirham, we find that this dirham emphasizes God's human qualities. It appeals for unity of God. There is no God but God. Once, not twice, not 3 times, not 5 times. And on the reverse, which expands the statement of the obverse, it says, and by the way, he's most merciful and most compassionate. It eliminates the surat al-Ikhlas, which, says that God is basically not human. Moreover, it does a better job emphasizing the delegation of authority to human actors. The mission verse, which is the Quranic excerpt that appears on the obverse, is moved to the obverse from the reverse of the Reformed coin. The last phrase, of that Quranic verse, he sent him to establish with right guidance in the religion of truth. The last part of that, to establish it over all religion, even if the corruptors object, is left off. The portion of that verse that might suggest violence against objectors to the caliph's authority or God's authority is left out. And what is transmitted is the fact that God's authority is delegated to human beings. Thank you very much.